Tonight, we're only a couple of days away from Pesach, as they say in English, Passover. So obviously it's very appropriate to talk about Pesach. But what's interesting is that there are many different what's called angles of understanding Pesach. And I would like to talk about an angle of Pesach, which personally I've never heard spoken about it from that angle, really by anybody, Yet this angle that I want to talk about is fundamental and it's essential. In fact, I believe in many ways it is the true understanding and meaning of what Pesach really is and why is it so important. That's a very important question. And what we will see as a sort of like an intro is that Pesach is a very unusual holiday, and it celebrates or commemorates a very unusual time on the divine plan. And I think in many ways most people don't realize the parallel that Pesach has to the redemption itself. And not only the redemption, but the entire divine plan. And this is what I'd like to talk about. The resemblance or the parallel of Pesach to the divine plan itself. Okay? And that becomes the major concept of Pesach. And not only that, it becomes the major concept of the divine plan. And it also will explain the meaning of the mitzvahs. So let's begin to try to get a handle on Pesach. Now we all know the story of Pesach, obviously. It takes place in many different parshiyos in the Torah and so on, We know clearly that it is pivotal, it's essential, it's fundamental to Judaism. Because we know the Jews were slaves in Egypt for many years, and they were redeemed by the Ribono Shel Olam. They were taken out of Egypt, and then they were brought to Har Sinai, and the Ribono Shel Olam gave them the Torah. We know this, and so on. So we're talking about the redemption from Egypt. We're talking about that the Jewish people became a nation, independent as a nation. And then, of course, they will receive the Torah, the fundamental book of instructions. That's one way of looking at it, in terms of doing mitzvahs and worshiping God, and so on. But the truth is, Pesach is much greater than what we can imagine. So therefore, what I'd like to do is talk about a deeper understanding, an essential understanding of Pesach, from perhaps a different angle than you've ever heard before. Well, before I begin, this share should be a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Ruvain and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf, Ben Tzvi Hirsch, Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf, and Shmuel Ruvain ben Regina as a refuah shlema. And also a refuah shlema to Esther Liba Bas Chaya Yafa. And Shlomo Leib ben Fega. All of them should see whatever Yeshua they need. In any case, so the first question is, why is Pesach so important? And if you're wondering, well, it's important, obviously. It's a major holiday. Not only that, it costs a fortune. Just so we all know that. In fact, it gives new meaning to the word lechem oini, bread of poverty, because when you basically finish with Pesach goods, you're basically broke. So in that sense, it is lechem oini, to buy matzahs. And also, the word Pesach is to pay sach, to pay a lot. In Yiddish, Pesach means to pay a lot. That's exactly what you do on Pesach. Okay, so obviously, clearly, it's very important. Where do we see this? Because there are only 2 mitzvahs aseh, positive commandments in the entire Torah, that if you transgress, if you don't observe the Korban Pesach, you chayav chorus, extinction, or whatever, extirpation, whatever they want to call it. You die young, and you don't have any other mitzvahs aseh other than milah, circumcision, that you have that. Not only that, what really indicates that Pesach is so important is that you say it twice a day, right? You're supposed to mazkir, you're supposed to mention Pesach, Yetzias Mitzrayim, twice a day. Certainly it's once a day, but basically even twice a day. And why would you have to do that? You see? So the question, which is really very important, is why is it so important? I mean, it's obviously a very important event. It forms the beginning of our identity, no question about that. But the question is, what really lies behind the significance of Pesach? And that's what I really would like to go into, and so on, And also, hopefully, I can give meaning or rationale to the mitzvahs of Pesach. And they are 4 koses, 4 cups of wine, and then in the kos shel Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah, Eliyahu Navi, right, which is part of that, and so on. So the question, of course, is, what does that signify? Then, of course, you have morah, bitter herbs. You have chometz, obviously, that's what we have to avoid. And we have matzah, right? And then we have the Korban Pesach, which is critical, which formed a basic fabric of the whole holiday of Pesach. Nowadays, of course, we don't have it, but we certainly look forward to the Korban Pesach. And of course, we have the Haggadah. You have to talk about Pesach, the holiday, the meaning of the holiday, and so on. So how do we understand these particular mitzvahs, and how do they contribute to your overall understanding of Pesach? Okay, now I have mentioned many times the word tikkun, rectification, right? Correction, rectification, repair, restoration. They all mean the same thing. To restore something in many ways to what it was, to correct. That's what the word tikkun means. But I've tried to explain in the past what exactly is the tikkun. We have a general idea, right? The general idea of tikkun is to go back to God, or rather, God should come back to us, because the Moshe created the creation, obviously, and he removed himself from creation. And our task, of course, is to find him by believing in him, okay? And as a result of that, he will then restore his presence to the Bria, which is the creation. And that's Tikkun. Tikkun is the restoration of the divine presence in this world. But the truth is, it's much more technical. It's more specific, and it's much deeper than that. And that's what I want to go into. What exactly is the Tikkun process? That's what I'd like to talk about. And believe it or not, Pesach is an actual model or demonstration of the entire Tikkun process in its specifics, not only the fact that the Moshe redeemed Israel and came back to them, certainly by the Makkos, by the plagues and so on, and Matan Torah, but it came back to them in a much greater way than we can imagine. And that's what I want to talk about. And what does this have to do with Pesach? In any case, so, believe it or not, Pesach is the first attempt to fulfill the divine plan. Right. Because you can ask yourself, did the Hashem ever complete the plan? To a certain extent, actually to a major extent. And we would say no, not really. He's been concealed most of the time. He did make his presence felt with the Beis HaMikdash and so on, and certainly in the desert and so on in Matan Torah. But to complete the plan, no. And I would like to demonstrate to you that really he did. Okay? The problem is that we, because of our sins, degraded or reversed the accomplishments that the Rebbe Hashem did. But really the Rebbe Hashem did complete the plan. Except the last minute, we destroyed the opportunity. And that's what I want to show you. And you will understand how incredible that is by realizing what the plan is in its specifics or particulars. Okay. Not only that, what's interesting is that what we begin to realize is something very important. The Haggadah. The Haggadah is what's called the mitzvah of Sipur. The Rebbe Hashem wants, V'yigadah lebincha b'yom hahu. The Rebbe Hashem wants us to talk about, to relate the event of Pesach. That's the Haggadah. But the question is, what do we really relate? Now, that's why we have an Haggadah. The Haggadah is that which we relate, which of course tells over a basic history of the Jewish people and what happened in Pesach and so on. It does say that. But the truth is, I believe that there's a deeper level that you should say over. People don't say over because they don't really know it. But I think if you do know it, what you will now hear is the real plan of God. What he really wants to do, and when I mean plan, I'm not talking about a part. I'm talking about an overall plan where you could see from beginning to end what it's all about. So in many ways, this is a golden opportunity to understand what exactly does the Rebbe Hashem want. And you will understand that Pesach is an unbelievable event that actually almost accomplished the entire divine plan, right? And that's very important. And that's really what you should tell over, I believe, to your children and so on, to your wife, wherever, guests and so on, because it behooves them to understand the divine plan. And I believe part of the reason is there is so much stupidity, idiocy out there in terms of ideologies. There are so many belief systems. There are so many, as I say, ideologies and so on that are so wrong and they are so ridiculous. And I'm certainly not going to go into them and so on, but you can look from one religion to the next, and they're all in many ways idiotic in terms of proofs that they have for their veracity and their authenticity. So it's really important that in the midst of all this, I hate to say it, but junk ideology and junk thoughts, that you understand what Judaism really is at its deep level. I'm not going to go into all the technicalities, obviously, but you're going to go walk away with what's called the roadmap. You need to hear the roadmap once and for all in your life, but not in a superficial way, in really a comprehensive and profound way. Very important. And I believe that should be part of the Haggadah, right? Okay. Not only that, what is interesting is that this will give a new meaning for the word Pesach. What is the English translation of the word Pesach? That God passed over the houses when he killed the firstborn Egyptians. Passover. That's an interesting term. You mean, of all the words you could use, think about that. Of all the words you could use to describe a redemption, you use the word Passover? Okay, that's important, obviously, because he did. He passed over the houses and he spared the Jewish people. Okay, so he killed the Egyptians and he spared the Jewish people, right? But Pesach is much more than the destruction of the Egyptians, right? And the redemption of the Jews, right? It basically is much more about the Jews becoming a nation, an independent nation, and the redemption is actually an essential idea. But the fact that he passed over, right? Okay, important. But why should this holiday be called Passover? For those who have thought about this. So I would like to give a new meaning to the word Passover that is what's called an essential description of Pesach. It's a real challenge, but I really hope to do it, and so on. Okay, now, I'm going to summarize the entire divine plan. Just a couple of ideas. It's a real challenge, but I'm trying to do it. Idea one. The Rebbeinu Shem creates a situation. What is the situation he creates? He creates 7 different realities. Right. He actually creates different dimensions. Each dimension, in many ways, right, is distinct from the other. Right, we don't realize we live in a certain reality, right, called the physical world. But there are really many other realities, 6 others, you see, that the Rebbeinu Shem created. And they, like I say, they are distinct from one another. They have their own laws, right, as we will see. Their own laws. They have their own denizens, which means residents. They have their own objectives, and so on. And it's like it's an entire kingdom when you think about that. But there are 7 distinct realities. Okay, and that's what he creates. That's the first idea. Second idea, what he wants, and this becomes the real understanding of the Tikkun. So he creates a reality, the greatest reality, which I will mention. He creates the greatest reality of all, so great that we have no concept of what it is. It doesn't exist now. It will exist, and I will show you in a minute, but it is the greatest reality. Like I say, we have no idea what that means, and I want to tell you something. The Rebbeinu Shem can do a lot of great things. Not only that, he's a Kol Yochel. He can create the top, the greatest thing that we can imagine. We have no idea, of course, how he does it, but he can do it. So when I tell you that the Rebbeinu Shem created the greatest reality, I mean it literal, not figuratively. You see, so that's an idea. But he also creates 6 more realities below that, the greatest. So what does he want? Why create 7? Because he does create reality. Why? And the answer is because he creates 7 realities and he wants mankind to transform the first reality into the second, change it into the third, into the fourth, and into the fifth. The 6th and the 7th don't change. But the first 5 change. Right. So that's the first idea. The first idea is the concept of 7 realities. The second concept is that 5 of them have to be transformed like a ladder from one to the other. And that is the will of God, to traverse one dimension into the next. Okay? Now, if you're wondering what is the last reality, and therefore the greatest, in which all of the others will be transformed ultimately into, and the answer we know, it's called Olam Haba, the future world. You see, what future world really is, okay, is the 5th reality. Like I said, the last 2, 6 and 7, don't change. But the 5th reality is the greatest, and it's called Olam Haba. And it is incomprehensible. That means even if we understand all 4, we cannot understand the 5th. In fact, that's what Chazal allude to when they say, I know that everything that the prophets prophesied was concerning 4 realities. What will be in the 5th reality is unknown or cannot be comprehended. Very important idea. And the reason for that is because, as we will see, because it is phenomenal. Not only that, it is qualitatively infinitely ahead of all the other, and it will go on for eternity. Imagine that, what that even means. Okay, so, first idea, 7 realities, 5 have to be transformed. Third idea, who transforms them? Who? Not the Ribbono Shel Olam, or ultimately that's obviously what he does, but it is mankind, specifically the Jewish people. They are what's called the Masakin. Right, now you understand what Tikkun is. Tikkun is to restore or to transform one reality into the next until all 5 are complete. And the ones who do that, of course, are the Jewish people. But there is a very important, and I'm not going to go into why now, I would like to do it in the next year, a startling concept of why the Ribbono Shel Olam did it. But he did it this way. What way? It's called Midas Hadin. You want to you have to transfer reality, transform reality. Who? The Jewish people. But you have to transform it. I am not going to do it. In other words, you must cause the transformation of all 4 realities into the 5th. Okay? That's a very important idea. And that's called Midas Hadin. Midas Hadin means cause and effect. You need to do it. If you don't do it, guess what? Basically does not get done. Right? That's how strict the Ribbono Shel Olam is with that law of the universe. It is the first and fundamental law of creation. Midas Hadin. And we know that, as we know from Bereshis, that the word, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and so on, and Elokim, that God created the world, Rashi says, of course, with Midas Hadin, but he saw that it cannot proceed that way, so therefore he added what's called Rachamim, which is an interruption of Dinam. It's really what it is, which is a deviation of the plan, right? But I'll get into that, hopefully, next time I give a shiur, what the profound understanding is of Midas Hadin, right? But right now, that is the condition. It has to be caused by the Jewish people. And that itself is a very long discussion of how they do it ultimately, you see. Anyway, so therefore that's the condition. Therefore, now the question is, of course, how? Okay, so we're talking here about 5 realities. We're talking about the fact that they are all transformed into the ultimate reality. We're talking about the fact that not only are they transformed, but the Jews cause the transformation. They are responsible for the transformation, right? And now, but the question is, how? And I will explain at a future time, like I say, but the basic way of doing the transformation is an instrument called Ratzon HaBorei. You need to listen to God, right? Very important concept. And obviously, the major idea of listening to God is the mitzvahs, is the commandments. There you are. That's Judaism, right? And that is the basic Tikkun process. 1, realities. 2, the transformation of 5 of them. 3, it must be caused by the Jewish people. And number 4, it can be done only, basically, I shouldn't say only, but basically it is done through observing the will of God, Ratzon HaBorei, and of course that's what the Jews do basically, although there are many other ways. They do it through mitzvahs. Okay, that's it. I have just summed up Judaism in basically 4 ideas, right? And each idea or each category, each topic, of course, is a great deal to talk about, and so on, which my previous shurim have gone into. But my previous shurim have dealt with the specifics, and now I'm telling you the overall. So this is, as I said, the basic idea of Judaism, and so on, you know. In any case, each reality is qualitatively distinct, literally. It's a different, you want to call it universe. It's not like Earth and then there's Mars, which is similar, but there are different distinctions, obviously. But the distinctions between these realities are incredibly different, and so on, as I will now begin to point them out. Okay, what are these realities? Right, and what does it mean that they're transformed? How are they transformed? And like I said, the fundamental question, did it ever happen? Or do we have to wait? You know, did transformations of these realities ever occur in this time? Right. And the answer to that question, astoundingly, is yes. Right. The interesting thing about it is people don't realize that. They're not used to thinking of this in this way. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate, you see. And that begins to tell us of the incredible concept of Passover or Pesach, right? Because it actually occurred, you see. In fact, I am now going to tell you, once you know that, well, if the essence of Pesach is that there were transformations, literally, that occurred, right? We now understand why Pesach, Passover, is called Passover, right? It's not only because the Moshe passed over the houses, you know, of the Jews and only killed the Egyptians. What we realize is that he passed over from one reality to the next. Right, there it is. Passover. Pesach is a holiday or an event in which the Rebbe Shem passed over and he transformed at that time one reality into the other. So you could actually, if you were alive then, in many ways we were, you could actually experience for the first time in an actual physical event the different transformations. It was the only time it ever happened. And the only other time it will ever happen is at the end, as we will see. Because the Messianic era, as we can see, is one of the Passovers, is one of the different realities, and so on. So let me tell you, what are these distinct realities or dimensions? Okay. The first reality of which is absolutely beyond any living being comprehending, is God. Now, there are two concepts of God, actually. There's one God, obviously, but there are two kinds of presences. One which is not revealed, the second which is also basically not revealed, but it's less concealed than the first. I'll mention it only because it is, and therefore should be known. Nobody knows who God is, and there's a reason for that, and I will briefly say that. Why don't the greatest angels know who God is? What's the problem here? And the answer is that I will tell you something incredible. There's a statement of Einoid Milvadoi. What does that mean? It means that besides God, there is nothing else. Nothing. What does that mean? What that means is that God brought everything into existence. Okay? Everything. And if he didn't, it wouldn't exist. Now, what that means is not only he brought objects into existence, human beings, the universe, and so on, but he also brought concepts into existence, like love, war, hate, etc. These are ideas, but they exist in our mind as concepts. But that's because God gave them existence, right? If God were to take out the concept of war, we could not imagine it. Believe it or not, you see? So God created also concepts. He also created the concept called the conditions of existence itself. For instance, something cannot exist and not exist at the same time. You either are or you are not. You can't be not and something at the same time. Well, who made that? Why is that true? And the answer is because God says, I am going to create this condition of existence. There you are. 3 things God brought into existence. If he hadn't, they would not exist at all, you see. But what's interesting is that if God had not created everything, then nothing would exist. But you may ask me and say, wait a minute. I can tell you that there's something that exists. And I'm going to tell you something astounding that we don't really understand. What is that? You could say to me, I can show you something that God did not create. So what do you mean by Einoi Milvadoi? Besides God, there's nothing else. There is something else. What is that? The phenomenon of existence, right? Who made the possibility of being, of existence? He didn't. That's why he exists. So there's God, and there's a phenomenon, whatever it is, we don't know, of existence. That's a very good question. But I'm going to tell you something which is beyond comprehension. That God does not exist the way we think he does. In fact, God brought the concept or the phenomenon of existence into existence. Got that? It's incredible. That means he actually has the will that existence as a phenomenon exists. But wait a minute. If the phenomenon of existence doesn't exist, then who's he? Or what is he? And the answer is, it's unknowable. That's why we don't know. All of us, everything that is, including angels, you name it, has existence. If you take that away, I have no idea what's there. There is nothing there. And the truth is that even nothing, the phenomenon of nothingness, also exists. Everything has to exist. So what does it mean to say that God doesn't have existence? Of course he does in a way, that's why he is, but it's not what we think. It's incomprehensible, the nature of his being, because it doesn't resemble ours. It's not the same thing called existence. So that's the world of Atzmusoi, self, God himself. In other words, when you think about that, the only thing that is, even beyond the phenomenon of existence, is God himself. Could you imagine? He is the sole being, not only because he is the only thing that has existence, even existence is not part of him in the way that we think. And that's all we can say. It's incomprehensible, and so on. I mean, you could think about this an entire year. What does this mean? But we don't know. Nobody knows. And like I say, it's incomprehensible because it would mean that you would have to be God to know who God is. But as long as you are not God, and as long as you have been given existence as a phenomenon, you cannot possibly know what this means. And that's basically all I want to say about that. But it's in an extremely profound understanding of what we can understand of the nature of God. So the world of Atzmusoi, I just mentioned it, what it is, okay, but we cannot comprehend it. But let me tell you something, it's worthwhile knowing, because all those foolish people that argue, well, is God a male? Is he a female? Right? Does he come here? Does he have a son? Etc. It's ridiculous. Look at the difference between what I'm saying and what all religions say. Anyway, it's worthwhile knowing the depth of the belief in God that Judaism has. Anyway, for those who want to like more, I have too sure about who is God somewhere back in the pack. But anyway, okay. The second, what God now has to do is, wait a minute, I want to create existence, and then I want to create an other, right? That's what I want to do. So how am I going to appear to them? They cannot comprehend. They cannot in any way, understand anything about me, and so on. So what the Russian creates is called a representation of himself. And that's basically what it is. And that representation of who God is called the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof, as far as we're concerned, is God. But it's not Atzmusoi, you see. It is the way God appears or presents himself to us. But as far as we're concerned, that's the only thing that we can grasp, a concept of an Ein Sof. Even though the Ein Sof, which means infinite, is so sublime that we have no real concept either of what that is. Right? But as I say, the Ein Sof is a phenomenon that God creates to represent him to us. That's the second area, or the second reality. The third reality, what is that? The third reality is what's called Zulosoi, where God creates an other. And of course, who is the other? The other is the neshama. The neshama is the greatest thing ever created, okay? And that's who the soul of man, specifically the Jew, is, and so on. And we have no idea. Now I'm going to dwell on that when I talk about why God made Midas Hadin. Very important idea, because we have to understand the nature of an other. What is it? What is the nature of a soul? And so on. But that's not for this year. In any case, it's an important idea. So Zulosoi is the third area or reality that God creates. And like I say, it is the soul, the most sublime creation that he has ever made. The fourth reality is Ruchni, is spirituality. Yes, believe it or not, this neshama is much greater than the ruchni spiritual beings like angels and so on, right? You know, they are much lower on the totem pole, as they say, you know, than the neshama. But they are an entire universe with their own laws, right? Their own conditions, their own objectives, their own different levels. That's ruchni, and so on. So that is what? That is number 4. Number 5 is now God creates, after ruchni, God creates geshem, physicality. Right. He creates what's called physicality. The geshem. Right. And that's the world he creates. But what God also creates is the next world, which is number 6. And what is that? That's the world of Zoyama. What is that? God creates a world that we call the Sitra Achra, the other side. It's evil, in the sense that it's always trying to get us to go against the will of God. That is the fundamental purpose of evil, is to get us to disobey Him, to defy Him. That's why it is called evil. You see, the world of Ruchni, spirituality, conforms to God completely. The world of Sitra Achra, the other side, defies God. And of course, the head of that is called a Satan, a satanic figure. And he's in charge. And he has enormous amount of, if you want to call them soldiers, officers, whatever you want to call, Malchi Chavola, and so on. And that is the world of the satanic world, and so on. And that's the 6th world. And the 7th world, which should never have been, but had become, right, is the combination between the satanic world and the physical world. They have merged, you see. There you are, 7 worlds. Asmusoi, Ein Sof, Zulosoi, Ruchni, okay, Geshem, Sitra Achro, Zoyamo, and number 7, of course, is the combination. There you are. Now, this is what God made, and what He wants, and He made specifically 5 of them to be transformed, you see, to be transformed, and so on. So what He did is He placed man who will do the transformation by causing the transformation. And that's the Tikkun process, by doing the will of God, specifically commandments, mitzvahs, tshuva or repentance, and yisurin or suffering. Those are the 3 basic ways that are the instruments or device to transform, to do the transformation. You see, in any case, and therefore He placed man in the world of Geshem to conceal the presence of God, where man has to use his mind, his reason, and come to believe in God. But it's not just doing and believing. You have to practice your belief. You have to demonstrate your belief in concrete ways, which of course is the mitzvahs and tshuva. And the result of that, you will have caused the transformation. And if you do that, you will experience the transformation by transforming all the worlds 5, right? The combination, the Zoyama, the Sitra Achra, the world of Geshem, and the world of Ruchni, which, by the way, basically is Olam Hazeh. You will have transformed it to Olam Haba, the world of the future, right? And just to let you know something, that the world of Olam Haba, what really is it? It is the world of the Zulosoi, right? That's what Olam Haba really is. The Zulosoi, which is the Neshama, the other that God created, is so great that it needs a special type of resonance, dimension, or reality, and that reality is called Olam Haba. You now understand. That's why there is an Olam Haba, because it is the world that is inhabited by the Zulosai, by the Neshama. And since it's inhabited by the Neshama, and the Neshama is forever, Olam Haba, future world, is eternal, you see. And I will talk about another time, Olam Haba, what it is and so on, and why we have to cause it and so on. In any case, this is what Olam Haba really is. It is the end game of the transformations. But don't make a mistake. It is a transformation. It is not Olam Hazeh. It's not the world of Geshem, physicality. It is not the world of spirituality. It is a world that we, Ainoi Ruasa, the eye has never beheld what is stored up for the righteous. Because we really do not understand who we are. We do not understand the concept of the neshama. And that is a very important idea. And I will tell you one more thing which is fascinating. The reason, the power of Olam Haba, when I say it is a residence of the divine Zulasa, the neshama, the soul, what makes it so special, what makes Olam Haba so special? Because, as I will explain, not now, but Olam Haba is an appendage or a part of Ein Sof. Right. It's a very important idea, and that will be understood when I talk about Midas Hadin, right? That's what Olam Haba really is. It's an appendage of Ein Sof. That is why it is beyond belief. That is why it is eternal. And that's why, by the way, it is perfect. Right. Olam Haba is perfect. And so on. In a way that a residence can be perfected. Now, I had asked an original question. Well, it's fascinating. We now understand very clearly what Judaism is. Of course, in a general sense. But at least we have a real handle, which is great. Okay. So the question that I ask, did transformations ever happen? Really? Now? Did we see this? Have we ever experienced, or has mankind or the Jewish people experienced actual transformations? And the answer is an astounding yes. When? And you know what the answer is? In Egypt. Right. You will now begin to understand what Yetzias Mitzrayim was. In fact, what Egypt was. It was an actual exhibit of transformations that went all the way, basically, okay, all the way up to the end, the fifth level. So you're going to look at me and say, what are you talking about? We don't learn anything about this, but I will demonstrate to you clearly that it is so. And then you will understand why Egypt, or the celebration of Egypt, is so critical. Because it is an actual actualization, right, of Olam Haba, as we will see. Okay, so first, there was an Avodah, right? God created Adam, Harishon, first man, and he was given a mitzvah, basically one. Don't eat from this tree of good and evil, right? That was the Ratzon HaBorei. Right? Had he done that, and he was pure Geshem. He had no evil. He had no Zoyama. He had no Satan in him. In fact, he had no Yetzer Hara in his body, because he was pure Geshem. Why would he have that? You see? And God gave him a commandment. What did he do? He broke the commandment. He sinned. So what God said is, I created a world called the Sitra Achra, the world of the Satan, right? The Zoyama, which is the projection of the Satan. It's a force that the Satan can exude, right? And it controls things. So he tells Adam, you sinned. So I created the world of the Zoyama, the Sitra Achra, the other side. And it was always separate. You see, it happened to have been in the manifestation or the representation of the Nachash, the snake, right? But it was not inside you. The most that the snake could do to you, right, was to offer an argument, a tempting argument, right? And the amazing thing is what the Satan offered. The Satan in the end was wrong, but he was right. As we will see in the next year, he was exactly right. But of course he was wrong in that he degraded God. I'm not going into what the Satan did, which was terrible. But he told Adam Harishim, V'yisim kelokim, he told really to Chava, you will be like God. And he was right. You will be like God, which is a secret of Olam Haba, right, which I will talk about not this week. But in any case, Adam Chava was clearly tempted because what an offer, right? And he sinned. So God said, I made another dimension, right? Which is number 6, which is the world of the Sitra Achra. And I never intended to mix it with you, and you are pure Geshem, pure physicality, although not in the same level as we. Because without getting into it, he was physical purely, which is different than what we are. We are not the same as Adam before the sin, even though we are still basically physical. But his physicality was much greater, purer than ours. In any case, so God said, because you sinned, you believed the Satan, so you introduced the Satan. So you know what you did? You transformed reality, right? But it went backwards. You were supposed to transform reality from Geshem to Ruchni, right? Physicality to spirituality. Instead, you reversed the process because you sinned. So now, because you disobeyed me, you defied the will of God, you transformed your reality, physicality, into what? Into the world of the Satan, the Yetzer Hara. You allowed his world to become part of yours. Is that not a transformation? Of course it is. Because if it works up, guess what? It works down or backwards. Now you begin to understand the power of man's action. He actually transformed the world of Geshem into the world of the Satan. And what happened is they became a new type of reality called a combination of Sitra Achra and physicality. Guess what? That's the world we live in, right? Terribly, we can thank Adam Harishon for what he did. But he was the first one to transform reality. Right, that's what it is. Because we never had the reality of the Satan. It existed in potential, but it never existed in Adam, and he brought it into Adam. Wow, what a concept that he actually performed the first transformation into a lower, worse, evil world. And then guess what? We now have this world of what? Of combination. Combination of physicality and Satan. Sitra Achra, the other side. Therefore, what Adam did, that was the first incredible thing he did. The second thing incredible he did, obviously, if you changed or you transformed the world to a lower level, another reality, a lower reality, then your avodah changes. Right. Your avodah is no longer to change physicality into what? Into spirituality. That's only if you're at the level of spirit of physicality. But if you're not Geshem, and you are now in the world of combination, you need to undo the combination. Right. You need to transform the world and yourself, your body, from the combination reality to the physical reality. Wow. You now understand that the major avodah, the major work is to change the physical world, is to change the world of the Satan that we are part of back into the physical without any satanic influence. And by the way, does that ever happen? And the answer is yes. That is the Messianic era. Right. Messianic era is the era of Adam HaRishon before the sin. That we will have succeeded in transforming, you see, what Adam should have done, and we now have to do for 6,000 years. Right. You now understand the basic job that has been going on for 6,000 years, to get rid of the Sitra Achra, to get rid of the Zoyama, right, into pure physicality. And when we become purely physical, we don't die. Just like Adam doesn't die. That's why God said, if you eat from the tree, you will die. Why? Because you will have introduced a destructive force, and that will kill you. You see? That's why Adam dies. But if you don't do that, you will live forever. So that is why when we get rid of the Zoyam in the Messianic era, guess what? We will become physical, purely physical. You see? And that is Tchias HaMesim. Get rid of the Zoyam, and we will live forever, which means we will never separate the body from the neshama. Right. Now you understand the dynamics of historically what happened and why, at least to a general extent. Right. Okay. So Adam sins, and he now descends to the 7th level of transformation. And his job now is to get rid of that. Well, what happens? Okay. Who's going to do it? Well, it's not Adam. He's finished. So it becomes mankind. So God says, okay, mankind, you have the job of Tikkun, which means everybody in mankind, after Adam, for 2,000 years, had the ability to transform, right, realities based on his actions. That was the power of the first 2,000 years, right? And they, of course, had the will of God, which were the 7 mitzvahs, right? Because everybody, the only instrument that can change the reality is to do the will of God. But in order to do that, there has to be mitzvahs. There was the 7 mitzvahs of Noach. That's what they really are. They were the original will of God to transform realities. Right, very important idea. Any case, okay, so now mankind is the Mesakin. Mankind becomes the transformer. But they sin, not only by Noach, they sin by the Dohafloga, the Mabul. And what happens to them? Jews, God decides to give the ability to transform to the Jewish people, right? So you have Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yosef, which I once talked about, because Yosef is a Chatzi of. He is a Shoresh, but only half of a Shoresh. So these 4 people, right, are the ones who are the Shoresh of Klal Yisrael, right? And they begin, obviously, the actions to get rid of the Zoyama, right? These are the Shroshim. And then it goes into and they do the avodah, which is whatever their mitzvahs are. And then, of course, Yaakov gives rise to the Yud Beis Shvatim, the 12 tribes, right? And they continue. So they start off with, of course, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they start off with the 70 souls that come, 70 Jews that come to Egypt, right? and that turns into the 600,000 root souls, right? In any case, then they reach a time that they did it. They have potentially transformed realities. So you're going to say to me, wait a minute, so what happens? Does reality change? And the answer is, it does. Egypt actually becomes the progression of the change or the transformations of realities for the first time in history, right? And now you begin to appreciate what Mitzrayim really is. So, how am I going to demonstrate that? Well, let's take a look at the phases of the end of the Egyptian sojourn or exile. Let's take a look that actually encompasses all of it, the 5 different realities. Because the Jews had completed their task without getting into all how and so on, but they did. So God said, since you completed the task of doing what? Of changing realities. Right, you did it. So I'm going to change reality. Actually now, how? Let's take a look. Well, first of all, they start off, right? What's the bottom line? They start off with Zoyama. That's the combination of Zoyama, which is the satanic world, right? The evil of the satanic world, right? The atmosphere of the satanic world, which is incredibly evil. They start off that way, together with Geshem, physicality. Where do we see that? What do you think when it says that the Egyptians, right, they took the 10 kabin of magic. What is magic? Magic is the power of the Zoyama. That's what it really is. They took 9 measures of Satan. What do you think that was? Right? That's the Zoyama. But they took it in spades. They took 9 measures, or kabin, baskets, whatever you want to call that, pails. They took 9 of them of magic, which is the power of the satanic, the Satan. And that's how they were able to replicate Moshe Rabbeinu's Makas. That's number 1. That's Zoyama. Because their atmosphere, Egypt's atmosphere, was filled with that. And besides that, as part of the combination, Mem Teshai Tumah. The Jews were on the 49 levels of what? Of evil. Or I should say not evil, but Tumah. So between the Egyptians and the Jews, what did you have? You had a combination. That was how they started off at the end of their Gullus, right? They had the Zoyama and they had the Geshem. Isn't that interesting? That's mamish what they had. Now what happens? Okay, Now, Egypt, of course, not only had the combination, but they themselves were the Geshem. Why? Egypt was known as what's called Shetufei Zima. Egypt was unbelievably licentious, libidinous, and so on. They were tremendously into Zima, right? That is Geshem, believe it or not, because it's a drive, right? It's a drive, of course, of reproduction and a drive for pleasure. But basically, it's natural, right? And they were heavy into that. So it comes out that in Egypt, you had all 3. You had physicality, you had Zoyama, and you had the combination of both. All of it wrapped up in Egypt. Because that's where they finally wound up. You see? Now, right, the Jews had to get out of that. So the Jews, the next symbol of that, okay, is the Jews struggled to get out of those 3. Okay? And what was it that they got out of? The Makas. I want to tell you something, which is what we really make a mistake. The makas were not what we think it is. You know, it says a Pesak, which is a hint. It's a profound hint of what was going on. We think, well, what happened was what? The Nile turned to blood, which is a phenomenal, otherworldly miracle, obviously. I mean, could you imagine a river called the Nile turning completely into blood? This would have driven the Red Cross ecstatic. I always wonder, what type of blood was it? Was it an O, an A, a B, or whatever? Right? But it was much more than that. We don't realize the makas wasn't just a deviation of physicality. It was a revelation of the spiritual forces behind the makas, which are the 10 spheres. And they were the 10 makas. Where do you see that? Because it's interesting, it says that by the makkah of Choshech, it says, Ulchol b'nei Yisrael, hoyo or b'moshvei som. And to the entire Jewish people, there was light in their dwelling. You see, that's a remez. Not only was there light and not darkness, because obviously they did not experience what the Egyptians experienced, but they saw the spiritual underpinnings of the makas. Right. It was much more than just the physical. They saw the spiritual underpinnings. In fact, I'll tell you something. God says at the end, Oid nega echod, I will yet bring one more, right, plague. And that was, of course, the destruction of the firstborn, the death of the firstborn, which is makas bechiris. But there's a very interesting question. It should have said, Oid nega, I will bring another plague. What do you mean, Oid nega echod? I will yet bring one more plague. What's this echod? Everybody got that? And the answer is because what God did, how did God kill the Egyptians? He revealed himself. He revealed his echod, and they died. Oid nega, one plague, echod. Of the echod, I will reveal my achdus, and they will die. Just like the Jews died at Matan Torah. Right. It's a very important concept. So what does that tell you? It means that they saw the underpinnings of makas bechiris. They saw keser, which is the echod, you see. And that is a reflection of all the makas. So therefore, the period of the makas is really a period of ruchni. Right? It's a transformation that the Jews changed the climate, the environment, into the climate and environment of ruchni, spirituality. Right? So we don't really even understand what they experienced. And people make a mistake. They think it was just a physical deviation. No, it wasn't, as I just showed you. You see, then what happens? Well, then from Ruchni, right, where do they go? You see, they go to what is called, right, more spirituality, which is what? A greater transformation, which is number 4, right? So the makas is the beginning of the level of spirituality on the physical side, underpinnings of the physical universe, to pure ruchnius. What is that? Kriyas Yamsuf. It says what a maidservant experienced by Kriyas Yamsuf, Yecheskel Hanovi never experienced. Could you imagine the one who wrote about the Maaseh Merkava, the divine chariot, didn't come to the vision of a maidservant? Why? Or what I should say, what? Because she experienced incredible ruchnius, spirituality. Right, that was Kriyas Yamsuf, and not a Kriyas Yamsuf, it was the Nun Shari Bina of what? Nun Shari Kedusha. It was 49 days of gradual ruchnius. So the Jews transformed their physical world into an unbelievable spiritual dimension. But this was real. This wasn't make-believe. They were actually experiencing it. You see this from the Medrash. They were actually experiencing spiritual dimension, visions of the spiritual worlds, the worlds of the angels, everything. Could you believe this? Okay, so there's one more world left to go, right? And what world is that? That world, of course, is the world of Zulosoi. You have any idea what that is? Where they experience self, true nature of self, in many ways, as a divine being. Right, and I'll explain that in another shir. Right, but where? You have any idea what kind of transformation that is? And the answer is, when? And we're not talking here about a drush. We're talking about a real experience. This is Egypt. Look at the transformations. It's astounding. When? And the answer is, Matan Torah by the Luchas Rishonos. Right. The Luchas Rishonos, what were they? Moshe Rabbeinu was Mashiach ben Yosef. All right? And the Luchas Rishonos, the first tablets, was the Orishon, you see, which is the beginning of the experiencing of Zulosoi, believe it or not. So they experienced this at Matan Torah. And the experience, like it says, that they were equal to Adam Rishon before the sin, which is messianic, because that's really what it is the world of pure Geshem. But they jumped way ahead of pure physicality without Zoyama. Why? Because of the gift of Luchas Rishonos. That's what elevated them. It wasn't that they received just the ore of the ore of physicality, pure physicality. They actually experienced the Torah itself at an unbelievable level. And that's why it says that God opened up the heavens. What did they experience? Right? It says that they experienced tremendous amount of ha'ora, of vision, and it says that Ato Reisel Das, you have been shown that you may know. Kashem Elokim, God is the only one, He's the God. Einod Milvadoi. And Rashi says on that pasuk in Dvarim that God opened up the heavens and He revealed His oneness. Revealed His oneness, that's not just ruchnius. Each person became like Moshe Rabbeinu because each person experienced the revelation of God communicating to him the first two mitzvahs. But in order to do that, they had to be on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah, because you cannot receive the hasaga of Torah unless you're on the highest level of nevuah, which is the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. But in order for Klal Yisrael to receive the first two mitzvahs, and that's what they received, and Moshe Rabbeinu only received 611, they had to be on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, obviously. But what level is that? That's a level of Chatzi Elokim, like Moshe Rabbeinu, half man, Chatzi Ish, Chatzi Elokim, Ish Elokim, right. And that is Zulosoi, because when you experience yourself as a God, no matter how much, you are experiencing other Zulosoi. And we have no idea of what that experience was. Could you imagine that type of transformations? And they all happened. I'm not talking here about fantasy. This is Egypt. We all know this. Except the problem is that we're never used to thinking of what it really means. These are not just, well, it's interesting experiences. What are you talking about? The Zoyama, the Zima, the Geshem, and then the Ruchnius of the Makkos, the Ruchnius of the 49 days. This was real. We see that from the Amma Avriya, who experienced more than Yecheskel. What do you think she saw? She was a greater Navi than Yecheskel, and he was phenomenal. He wrote about the Ma'aseh Merkava. You don't get better than that, you see. And here's a maidservant. Could you imagine what the average Jew experienced? What the kids experience if the maidservant experienced this? And then all of a sudden you talk about that they were equal to Adam Rishon before the Chet. That's messianic. You see? And then Matan Torah, that he revealed Yehuda Shalom, God revealed himself as the Einoi Melvadoi. That's Zulosai. You see? There you are. Egypt is a completely different experience than you could ever imagine. Now you understand why it's called Passover. Right? Because one reality passed over to another, all the way up to number 5. Now, isn't that astounding? Now you understand why Mitzrayim, Pesach, is so unbelievable, because it is a replica, a model of the actual Judaism, the actual transformations of what God wants, and He allowed the Jewish people to experience for the first time in history these transformations. Look, this is an incredible understanding of what we are about to enter. You see, and you know where you see this? It's interesting remez. In Bereshis, it says, and God created on that day Behi Baram, and He's creating them, man and woman. So Chazal learned Behi Baram is really Behei with 5, He created them. What's 5? So 5 stands for different things. It stands for the 5 patsufim, Kabbalistically, and so on. But what it also stands for is the 5 realities of transformations, because that's really what Judaism is. That's what God wants. The ultimate transformation that the Jews must cause to the Ratzon HaBorei, the will of God, to change all reality into the reality of what? Olam Haba, which is the reality of the Zolosai, of the Neshama itself, pure. And that is a part of the Ein Sof. So we have no idea what's about to happen. If you think this world is glorious, this world is a dump compared to what's about to happen even in the Messianic era. We cannot conceive, as Chazal say, the eye has never beheld what is about to happen ultimately at the end of time. Right. And that is Behei Baram. And what is interesting is we now can understand the mitzvahs of Pesach. Right? The mitzvahs of Pesach, how each one symbolizes one of these different realities. Isn't that interesting? Let's take a look. The 4 cups, Arba Koises, and of course the cup of Elio. What is that? The 4 cups, why do we say they replicate the 4 Lashonis of Geula? Right? Lokachti, V'hotzesi, V'goalti, and so on. In Vo'era, there are 4 expressions of redemption. Right? Why are there 4? Because the Klippa, which is the Zoyamah, the Sitra Achra, has 4 worlds, right? And when God took us out of Egypt, He took us out of the 4 worlds of the Satan, right? He took us out of the 4 satanic worlds, right? Which is incredible what God did. In fact, what's interesting is the Gematria. When God said to Avram Avinu, right, that and afterwards they would go out. Of course, he's referring to the redemption of Egypt, right? The gematria of Yetzu B'Rechush Gadol is the exact gematria of Nitzotzei Kedusha, the sparks of holiness. God took all the sparks of holiness, which is in the Zoyamah, which we have to take out. The gematria is Yetzu B'Rechush Gadol. That was the divine, the incredible possessions that God would give us, and He would take it out of Egypt with us. And then when it says, V'yotzu kol tzivos Hashem eretz Yisrael, the Gematria, it says, and God took out the Jews, all the hosts of Israel, right, out of Egypt. The Gematria of V'yotzu, me'eretz Mitzrayim, is Gematria nitzotzei kedusha. Again, because that's what God did. He took us out, right, and that's therefore why we have 4 Lashonis of Geula, of redemption, right, and we drink it to tell us that God took us out completely out of the Zoyama, right, and that's how we moved into the world of Ruchnius, spirituality, and this is what God did. So that's 4 cups, okay, but why did God take us out? Well, why do we have the cup of Elio? Because we're missing something. Not only do we have to get out of, right, out of the Zoyama, we have to change Geshem, right, into Ruchnius. Guess who did that? Eliyahu Hanavi. So we have a 5th cup saying that ultimately it's not enough just to get away from the Zoyama. We want to change Geshem into what? Into spirituality, which is the next transformation, and that is Kosh Eliyahu, because that's exactly what he did. In order to get into heaven, by the way, you got to become spiritual. I'm saying, at least at some level, even Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went up to heaven to confront the angels, he also had to become spiritual at some level, and that's why he didn't have to eat for 40 days and drink for 40 days. In any case, look at what we're seeing here. It's all different Pesach. You see. Oh, so that's the 4 cups, right? Okay. Moror. What is Moror all about? Well, Moror is basically the Zoyama, bitter, right? It is a bitter food that represents the physicality of bitterness. That's the Moror, right? And the Zoyama is one of the worlds that we got to get rid of, right? Chometz. What is chometz? Chometz is interesting. Chometz really is the combination, because chometz has 3 things. It has flour, it has water, and it has seor, which is leaven. All 3 stand for the combination. What is the combination? Really? The combination is flour, which is physicality, water, which is what? Water is spirituality. That's mayim. And the seor, the leaven, which makes it rise with hot air, I have to say, is the zoyama. What is that? That's the combination. So God says, you need to get rid of the combination. No chometz. Chometz is a food that stands for the combination of Geshem and Zoyama together. That's what chometz is. And that God says, because you transformed at that time everything, you cannot eat chometz, which is a representation, right, or a replica of that existence or that reality. Isn't that fascinating? How each food represents a reality. You see? So we already have the Zoyama, we have the Geshem, and we have the combo that he took us out. Right? Okay. Matzah. Well, what is matzah? Matzah is a food that has flour, right? And it has water. But there's no sahor. There is no, there is no leaven. Why? Because matzah represents ruchni, right? So God says you got to eat matzah. That is the state that I began to take you out of, which is the Makos and the 49 days. And that's only soul and physicality, no Zoyama. And that's exactly what we got rid of. We removed the Zoyama, you see? So that's matzah. Okay. Now, of course, we have the Afikoimon, which is the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is very interesting. You see, I believe that the Korban Pesach stands for the Rabbanu Shalom. The Rabbanu Shalom wants us to partake of himself, the Dveikus, right? And it answers many questions. For instance, why is it that you cannot break a bone in the Korban Pesach? And the answer is because when you are connected to God, you are perfect. You are sholem. So how can you break a bone in that korban? Right. So you can't break a bone in that korban because that korban represents perfection, completion. It represents the divine itself. You see? So that's number one. Why is it you have to eat it b'chabura? Because you don't eat it individually. All the Jews together are in Olam Haba, together with God. In Olam Haba is a chabura, right? Even though we're Zulasai, we experience our true selves, but it's together as a unit because Klal Yisrael is one organism. Therefore, we have to eat the Korban Pesach as a chabura. Isn't that fascinating? You see? And also, you have to eat it sili, roasted. And roasted is a way of cooking with a direct contact to the fire. What is the fire? Well, that's the burning bush. That is the divine presence. Right. So what's fascinating is we actually see the Pesach represents basically the transformations and the Ribono Shel Olam in those transformations. And that is the Afikomet. And of course, the Haggadah, right? Haggadah is the retelling. This is what we have to say. And I believe people are shortchanging their family. It's not enough to talk about the event and all the drushes, which are very nice. You know, there's all kinds of ramazim and event, you know, and drushes expounding. It's nice. That's not what Pesach is really about. Pesach is a replica. It is a model. It is the Ge'ula. It is not the redemption. It is the totality of the divine plan, which for the first time in history, the Jews actually experienced. These are not just, you know, phases of an event. These are actual transformations that will happen. Right. I wish God did it again in a certain sense, which He will, of course, but we can look forward to that. You see, therefore what we see is something beyond belief in a certain sense. Pesach is the unfolding or the actualization of the divine plan for the first time in history. 5 transformations that actually happened. Of course, the terrible tragedy was the Jews undid it and they restored the first world, which is the combination of the Zayamah and Geshem. Terrible, by the sin of the golden calf. You see? So what are we going to do? Represent that? So of course not. You know? And so on. So in a certain sense, guess what? There is a representation of the Chet Egel. You know what that's called? It's called Chometz. We're back to Chometz, right? That's why we go right back, right? In fact, we can't even wait. What's the first thing you do after Pesach is over? Besides putting away the dishes. You got to go for your pizza. Why? Sort of. That's a joke, by the way, right? In order to go back to the Geshem. Anyway, but that's, and I'd like to end with this. Wow. We say 15 things, right? Kadesh in the Haggadah. We have 15 different things we do on the Haggadah. Kadesh, right? Kiddush, Nirchatz, we wash our hands. Yachatz, we break the matzah. Karpas, we eat whatever, potatoes, whatever, dipped in salt water. And then, of course, is Magid. We say the Haggadah. Rochso, we wash our hands. And then Moitzi, we make the Moitzi and matzah. We eat the matzah, right? And then, of course, we have Morah, we eat Morah. Koyrach, we bind it together with the matzah, right? Then we have Shulchan Aruch, I should say, right? We eat the meal. Then we have Tzafin. We eat the Afikoman. And then Borech, we bless, right? We bench. Hallel, we say Hallel. And Nirtzah, everything is beautifully accepted. I'd like to indicate the remez of all 15. All it is nothing more than the instrument. How do we do the transfer? It is these 15 ideas or words or marames, they allude to the whole process of transformation. Right, believe it or not. Let's take a look. Kadesh. At the beginning, what was there? Kadesh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God. right? That's Kadesh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then what did God do? He separated physicality, right, from the physical world, or rather from the entire Zulosoi. That's Nirtza, Nirchatz. He washed his hands of creations. That's Simsum. You see, he said, I'm going to create an other, and all the other others down. So that's Nirchatz. Right, Nirchatz. Then what he did is Yachatz. He created two things. He broke Olam Haba into Olam Hazeh. That's Yachatz. Okay, now what? Well, now everything is ready. So I'm going to create Adam. And Karpas is two words, Samach, 60 or 600,000, Porach, which is 600,000 souls, which are the Jews. Porach, labor to do the mitzvahs. That's Adam. That's a remez to Adam. And what do they do? Magid. They have to declare the Torah, which is to do the mitzvahs. Right? And what is the purpose of the mitzvahs? Rochsa, to wash our hands of the Zayamah. You see? And what will we do if we do that? Moitzi, matzah. We will bring the matzah, which is the redemption. I'm combining two words. Right? Isn't that incredible? But what happens if you don't do the mitzvahs? Then moror, bitterness, koirech, you are bound to suffer. Moror, right? That you're going to experience a lot of moror. Because the only way to do the tikkun. Right? So as a result of that, you will be zoicha to the shulchan aruch, to the prepared table, which is Olam Haba, which is prepared for all of us. And what happens in Olam Haba? Borech, you will be blessed. Right? That's the state. You want, right? Of Shlemus. Borech, you are in the greatest blessed state of existence. And what do you do in that state? Hallel. You say Hallel, you are masik the Rabbeinu Shalom. Right? You are actually dvekus, and you actually perceive the greatest nevuah of all, where not only you are attached to God, you actually experience God. And when all that is finished, right? Nirtza, everything is accomplished. Isn't that interesting? The entire 15 steps of the Avodah of the Haggadah is basically the entire divine plan. So you got it. Remember, those are the 4 ideas of the Tikkun. What are they? 1, the realities. 2, the transformations of these realities. That's the key through the mitzvahs, right? Right, transformation of the realities, right? How? Adam, the Jew, he's the only one that could do it. He has to cause the transformations. How? By doing the will of God fundamentally, which is the mitzvahs. That's it. That is the plan of God, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, and so on, you see. And what we see, the incredible thing, is that Pesach is an actual event, not a fantasy. It's not just a holiday where the Jews got out of Egypt. It was more than that. When the Rosh Hashanah decided to take the Jews out, he did something which is beyond comprehension. He said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give them a nice prize. Vayed Elokim, and God knew, I'm not only going to give them freedom, which is redemption, I'm going to give them the transformations. It's astounding what he did. And I just showed you how it works, and it did work. Tragically, we undid it. But that's not the end. We are now at the end of time. You see, where we will experience the transformations. And I want to tell you something. We have no comprehension. We cannot even begin to imagine what the Messianic era is. Forget about current events. Forget about America and Israel. Forget about Israel. Forget about the physical world. It's over with. It's all about God, period. And the highest reality God ever made. And I want to tell you something. God is a good craftsman. If he wants to make a party, you cannot believe the party that he's going to throw for you. Right? It's going to be the best, the greatest, the most sublime. And that's what we experience. So please, if you can, listen to the shir, get it. And try to tell your kids, your wife, all your guests, what Judaism really is and what we have to look forward to. I want to thank the Rabbi Shalom publicly for making me better, for healing me, because I had undergone several operations and so on. And the Rabbi Shalom healed me, and I'm amazed that he gave me the strength to say Pesach, So I'm hoping that I am, of course, part of the transformation, right, to a fully healthy, functioning, and able to say Shir until the Mashiach comes. And then guess what? I'll let him say the next Shir. Thank you.